Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. So, who are we talking about today?
Today, I'm bringing you Anjette Lyles, who did her murdering in 1950s in Macon, Georgia. So Anjette was born in 1925 to a prosperous family. She doesn't appear to have any reasons to turn to be a bad seed, but no head injuries, no abuse, none of that. Now,
So, she needed a spanking.
Probably so. So we're going to get this one started right when it all kicks off and kind of work our way backwards rather than starting from the beginning since her childhood is uneventful. So on June 10th, 1959, a grand jury would accuse Anjette of killing her 9-year-old daughter, Marcia Elaine Lyles, with arsenic by wickedly and deceitfully enticing Marcia to take the poison for the purpose of killing her. Now, Marcia would She would initially become sick in March and then eventually die on April 5th, 1958. Anjette did have a life insurance policy on Marcia, but Marcia's defense would be that no one had any idea of when the little girl got into arsenic or took it or any dates, times, or anything like that. So how could they know that she was the murderer?
Where's the dad, the husband, the father of the little girl?
We're getting there. Now, the state would come back with, "Oh, yeah? Well, we believe you did this one because you've done it 3 times before."
I don't understand
Several witnesses. Several witnesses.
How is she not in jail? Wait, no. You can't skim over that one. If they know that she's done it 3 times.
I'm telling you a story. Okay. Several witnesses for the state would testify of 3 previous deaths associated with Anjette, that she had monetary motivations to have murdered them as well. This testimony was initially objected based on it being irrelevant to Marcia's trial, or her murder trial, but it was decided to be heard due to the testimony showing the purpose of the plan and motive with respect to the current crime. You know, the old, people are dropping like flies around you, so there seems to be a correlation to this, and also you seem to be the only beneficiary shining up plan. Now, the other 3 victims that she's accused of killing would be Joe Neil Gabbert and Ben Lyles Jr., both former husbands of Anjette, and Ben's mom, her mother-in-law, Miss Ben Lyles Sr., or Julia Lyles. They call her either one. I'm going to stick to her as Miss Julia so you know that that's her mother-in-law, just so you know.
All right.
Now, the testimony of the previous deaths showed the jury a logical connection to her killing Marcia. Each of the victims had a close relationship with Anjette. Each died from arsenic poisoning. Not only was it arsenic in each case, but rather than one fatal dose, uniquely, they each received multiple doses of arsenic that built up to a lethal level. Because of that is why the testimonies were allowed to be part of Marcia's case. And now, on top of all that, Anjette was the only close personal attendant to all 4 victims when they were taken to the hospital, 3 of which went to the same hospital. She also collected substantial life insurances on each death.
I don't understand how she hasn't been charged. Okay, I get the first one. Maybe they're like, we got to keep an eye on this one. But then the next one, and then the next one. Why is she free?
I know. I'm just getting you all squarely so I can break it down for you. Anjette also didn't appear to be grief-stricken in regards to all 4 deaths, despite the close relationship. And she also wouldn't be upset shortly after the deaths. In Marcia's case, several times she made a statement that she would kill Marcia if it was the last thing she ever did. There were several different people who heard her say that shit before the little girl got sick.
Why would she say that about her own kid?
Now, the thing that I was thinking was maybe, not to say that it's okay to say this, but in frustration to make I could kill them. I could kill them right now. If they don't stop that freaking noise, I will strangle them. And you were not actually going to go over there and strangle them kind of thing.
Is it really her daughter, or is it like a stepchild?
It's her daughter.
All right.
Now, in addition to all of that evidence, they also introduced forged checks, some of which were written after some of the people had died, to which I was like, she couldn't even come up with a predated nonsense. But they end up determining they're forgeries, but she claims that she didn't write them. But it's like, really? Really?
Were they written out to her?
I I don't know what they were written out to. Probably so.
I didn't write them. They wrote them after they done died.
Now, you know what? So we'll get into it. I think they were business things, but rather, she should have just withdrew some stuff, but that would have been obvious too. Okay, so we'll rewind a little short beat and start with Ben Lyles. Now, Ben Lyles Jr. and Anjette would get married in 1947 when Anjette is 22 years old. They would eventually have 2 children together, Marcia and Carla. Now, the couple would, in the beginning of their marriage... Silence! Now, the couple would initially live with Ben's mother, or she with them, however you want to slice it. They lived together when they first got married. Now, Miss Julia loved her son very much and was always doting on him, which I was like, ugh. Hey, more power to doting mothers. However, when they get married, they can have a doting wife. Let them have their time. Now, it wasn't long before Anjette started working in the family restaurant in Macon, Georgia. That was a popular place for people to gather, because Macon at this point is a population of about 3,000, so a fairly tiny town. Not tiny, but it's a small town, but a lot of hustle and bustle of just people busybodying pretty much. But this is where you go for your town gossip and hanging out and doing all the things. But many people would describe Anjette as the sweetest woman they ever knew.
They didn't know very many people.
It was a small town. Now, Ben was a World War II vet that had a drinking and a gambling problem. In 1951, he would sell the family business to cover his gambling debts without even consulting Anjette, which made Anjette livid at this point, because not only did he sell the business short, but he didn't even consult her. But by this point is when she had just had their second child, little baby Carla. So she's just like, that was where that's where she worked. That's even where his mom worked. So I imagine his mom wasn't too happy, but I think she was probably, since she doted on him so much, she found out he needed money, so she was okay with selling the family business to help her boy. By the end of 1951, in December, Ben was declared permanently disabled, and around that time he also started to feel sick. And then by January, he became so severely ill, he was hospitalized on the 23rd. Now, when he's admitted, he was comatose, bleeding from his nose and mouth, and had generalized edema on his body. Blood was coming from his conjunctiva sacs of both eyes, and he was delirious. Vomiting, rapid breathing, and also had some random twitching of his extremities. So pretty much a fucking hot mess. Now, VA doctors would run a slew of tests, but not find anything of a cause of his sickness, so they were really just scratching their heads and just trying to stop all the things oozing out of everywhere. They do the best that they can, but he would die 2 days after being admitted. He's just 29 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Now, Anjette would receive $9,300 in life insurance, and then another $3,000 from a second policy. Now, in addition to that, since Ben was a veteran, she would collect $150 a month from the VA until she remarried, and then their children would receive $47 each thereafter. Now, Ben's mom would keep in touch for the sake of her grandchildren, and Anjette would move in with her parents and focus on learning how to run a restaurant and basically just hoard her money. Which, fast forward 4 years of her doing that, we're in April 1955, Anjette repurchases the Lyles restaurant and renames it Anjette's Restaurant. Now, the food was nothing special, but it was the atmosphere that drew people in and Anjette's lively personality. Now, she would also bring Miss Julia, Ben's mom, on as staff, also in hopes to bring in some of the old Lyles patrons. And on the opening day, she'll meet Joe Neil Gabbert. Now, he's 26 years old. He's 6 foot tall, 200 pounds. He's an airline pilot. They're all sorts of swoony. End up doing their dating thing and then decide to go on vacation together in July of that same year. And to everybody's shock, when they return, they let everybody know they got married.
Oh, shit.
Now, bear in mind, they met in April, were married in July.
Wow. Whirlwind romance.
Now, being a pilot, Joe would be gone a lot of the time. Now, 3 days prior to their marriage, a letter would be received inquiring about the VA insurance that he had out on himself and if the premiums were paid and still in effect. Later on, that letter is examined and determined to not have been written by him. Naturally, after their marriage, Anjette is made a beneficiary of the policy. Now, this policy gave Anjette $10,000. Another policy would be applied for in August for $20,000, but the couple ultimately decided they couldn't afford that. But they decide not to go for that second policy in August, right? Well, by November, Joe goes into the hospital for minor wrist surgery, which, by the way, I know I shouldn't have, but I did chuckle because if he's away a lot, what do you do to his wrist?
That's where my brain just went.
But he goes in for some minor wrist surgery. Now, why there? He receives fluids and juices, blah, blah, blah. Everything seems normal. He's sent home for recovery. Again, it's his wrist. Now, shortly after the operation, he developed a fever and a weeping rash that would spread over his body, from which fluids would flow out of the broken skin.
Ew.
Right? His face and eyes would be bound much of the time with wet bandages and dressings. Now, later, doctors' testimony would state that this condition would absolutely could be caused from arsenic, which I didn't know that could cause a weeping rash, which, by the way, never heard of that. Sounds absolutely revolting.
Yeah, my face right now is pretty disgusted, and I can tell you my coffee that's in front of me right now is not being drank no more.
Well, when I read a weeping rash, as soon as I was like, I wonder what that, I mean, I get weeping, but I was like, that means it was oozy, and then when it's like fluids would leak from the broken parts of his skin, I was like, I'm about to weep.
Ew. Yeah,
I feel like
I'm sitting here cringing. Ugh. It's all drippy. I'm picturing a drippy rash. That's friggin' disgusting.
Paired with a fever, too, so poor feller. Now, an attorney who was a patient at the hospital at the time would also testify that Anjette had talked to him and said she thought her husband should write out a will, and she would like for him to go talk to him. Now, the man would go to Joe's room, but as soon as he walks in and sees the condition the man's in, he tiptoes on out of there and decides not to talk to the feller. A nurse would also testify. He's literally
dying.
Right. He's bandaged. His eyeball holes are covered, and he's leaky. Like,
yeah, just leave the poor man alone.
Now, a nurse would also testify that when she walked in the room, Anjette was there and asked for the nurse to examine Joe's legs and feet because they looked discolored to her. She then made a statement that Joe was going to die soon, which the nurse thought was really fucking weird.
I agree with that statement. If you can see him and he's literally oozing and bandaged and from the sound of it, absolutely fucking miserable, I don't feel like it's a far-fetched response of, I think he's going to die soon. Because, yeah, even if she didn't do it, I feel like that's not an abnormal...
I don't feel like you should say that next to the person who's bandaged.
I don't feel like the person that's bandaged is going to be surprised to hear it. Because I bet you he feels like he's about to die.
Yeah. Well, regardless, Joe's transferred back to his home with Anjette, where she lived with her parents. Now, mind you, he can't do anything for himself at this point, so they have a registered nurse care for him. Nurse Jenny Engel. She would take one shift each day, and Anjette would look after him the rest of the day until the following day when Nurse Jenny would return. Now, Joe was being fed intravenously by the nurse up until November 30th when his veins collapsed. Now, Nurse Jenny told Anjette that because of this, and that's the only way he's getting his nutrition, he's got to go back to the hospital or he will certainly die. Anjette waited until the next night to call an ambulance to transport Joe. Now, part of me was a little upset because I get if she's in denial or whatever, but is that not the job of the nurse? Why didn't she call and be like, he needs to go now? They could all argue all day long that Anjette doesn't understand the gravity because the veins collapsing. She's not a medical personnel. They had a nurse for that. If the nurse thought it was serious, why didn't she call?
Right.
So I don't really fault her for not taking that action because she might
unless she's the one poisoning him and she's trying to wait it out, in which case that is her fault. But why did the nurse not do anything?
I would say delayed medical treatment is both their fault at this point, but I don't think him getting there any quicker would have saved him. But anyway,
no, he should have never been released.
I think because since he's just laying in a bed having his dressings changed, that they figured he could go home and be treated at home because this is a small town, limited space kind of situation. That if he goes home and has a nurse tend to him, that is fine. And obviously, if he takes a turn, come on back.
He was at the VA hospital, or
Ben was at the VA hospital. Joe was at the little hospital.
Gotcha. Okay.
Anyway, so she calls the ambulance for Joe. She doesn't ride in the ambulance. She follows behind in a car, accompanied by a man that the nurse could not identify. Which I was like, that doesn't necessarily mean anything suspicious. However, the first one I was like, she followed behind in an ambulance. I was like, maybe so that she wasn't stuck at the hospital without a vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I also wasn't like, and he's probably still drippy and oozy, and maybe it's better to take the car and let them be able to do their thing without an extra person in the ambulance. But
I wouldn't want to be stuck.
Joe would die the following day at the hospital on December 2nd. He was just 26 years old.
Jeez, they didn't even make it a year.
No. Restaurant staff would say that they would catch Anjette whispering to a black candle a few times when she thought no one was around, and it was suspected she was dabbling in black magic.
Sorry.
You gotta keep in mind it's the 50s. It was like she was whispering she just carries around a black candle. What? All right. That took a weird turn that I didn't see coming, but Nurse Jenny would testify that she had spoken with Joe several times about his relationship with his family, and that Anjette was the sole beneficiary of the life insurance policy that he had, and how his mother wouldn't be getting any of it because Anjette didn't want his family coming to Georgia. His family is from Texas. So it was stated matter-of-factly, so I don't know if they were just talking or if Joe was upset because Anjette's the sole beneficiary, and it sounds like he had regrets, but I don't know what tone he had when he was talking to her.
And you've also got that it's the nurse relaying the information, so I don't even know why it's any of the nurse's business who's the beneficiary of a life insurance policy.
So I think this was during when he probably knew he wasn't... He felt like shit. I feel like he probably was just talking to somebody who was there. But Joe would tell Nurse Jenny that should his family come, that and obviously if he passes, that he wanted her to tell them that he received the very best medical treatment.
Sounds like he had a crush on the nurse.
That's what I thought too. I was just like, was this a case of if his eyeballs weren't bandaged, he'd have just winked at her? He's got the very best nurse. She's making sure his wheelie is not leaky.
Ew.
Now, Nurse Jenny would also testify that the doctor requested an autopsy, because got to keep in mind, he came in for wrist surgery. He was otherwise healthy prior to all this, and then got a whole body rash that was oozing. They request an autopsy, but Anjette refused it, and when he told her that he could go around her, Anjanette became hysterical and said that Joe didn't want an autopsy, that they had both promised each other when they were vacationing and got all eloped all like, that they promised each other that should they die, they would not do autopsies on each other.
That's weird. I was like,
it's fucking weird. It's like, so in my thoughts of, if Dave keeled over from some freak disease that just sprung up out of nowhere and he just deteriorated rapidly, I'd want to know what happened. Yeah. I mean, I get people don't like the idea of their loved one being chopped up and pieces and bits being sent off all the places to figure it out.
However,
it's closure.
You've got the entire, like, what if it's contagious? I just saw what he went through. I don't want to become all oozy and weepy and
that could also
crusty and whatever else.
That could have been also why she took a separate car. I don't know. But they don't do the autopsy. Now, Nurse Jenny would also state that she ran into Anjette sometime after Joe's death, and she stated that she had met someone and was in love. He had a great job and a huge insurance policy, which I also find like, what? Who says that?
Okay, but here's the thing. If that nurse had a thing for Joe and now he's dead, it's possible since everything's coming from this lady that perhaps she, you know what I mean? Like,
I know. I don't know. When I was going through this, I was keep your eyeballs peeled for that this is all, things can be misconstrued and stories can turn into things that aren't actually true if you decide to look at them from a different angle, you know?
Yeah, like lighting a candle. I'm never going to whisper anything to myself ever. Like, I'm lighting a candle because it smells good and say, man, Dad, I really miss you. I wish I could sit here and have a conversation about this here case. No, because apparently it means you're doing some black magic.
Well, it could be one of those. Maybe she was lighting a candle for her former husband. Like, maybe it was like I don't know what, but apparently there's voodoo in the South. Black magic and black candles and lighting those and whispering things to them was black magic. But Anjanette would also change her name back to Anjette Donovan Lyles, which I kind of don't blame her for that. They were hardly married.
Yeah, and they have kids.
Yeah. Well, the first husband and her had kids.
Right. So she changed her name back to her, so her and her kids have the same last name again, right?
Right. Now, she also buys a house with the life insurance money, which apparently everybody thought was suspicious, which I was like, why? She bought her kids a house with life insurance money. I didn't think anything was suspicious with that either. Now, several other witnesses would testify to hearing Anjanette mention that had Joe not died, she wouldn't have been with him much longer because she couldn't live with him. She didn't love him, and they were on a path to divorce.
So again, I don't think that's that far-fetched because it sounds like that they ran off, had that whole lusty thing going on, eloped, and then she's having second thoughts. I don't think that has anything to do with wanting to kill him so much as she regretted the decision. It's not like she said she was glad he died. So I think
it's just a little distasteful. He's dead, but she seems to be the mouth of the South. And she just says whatever comes across her brain and has no filter. So to me, I was like, she really doesn't seem like she knows when to stop talking. And apparently she even whispers to candles. So she's just got the gift of gab and people are eavesdroppers. But Joe would be initially buried in Macon, Georgia, but his parents would have him exhumed and moved to Texas. Which I also don't blame him for that because he wasn't born and raised in Georgia. That's their boy. They can't even visit him, kind of thing. They were barely married. They didn't even know Anjanette, really. They met her once, and they were like, she seemed sweet. They felt bad for her because who expects to lose their new husband within, 7 months? 6 months?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now, Miss Julia, her former mother-in-law, would move in with Anjanette and the kids in that new house, which I thought was nice of her. I don't know if she did that with the purpose of like a babysitter or take care of Ben's mom, but I thought that was nice of her.
I'm
By
suspicious.
the summer of... So you be suspicious, but I'm just saying, like, fuck you, Andrew. That's in 55 is when he departed. But then she buys the house and moves in Miss Julia the summer of 1957. Now, Anjette attempts to buy a car from a dealership, and they tell her she'd need $1,000 down payment at the very least to get it. She would tell the dealership fella... She would tell the dealership feller that her mother-in-law was in the hospital in a real bad way. She was so ill that she wasn't sure that she would live much longer. She'd say, in about a month, she might be back and will pay full price for that there car, since her and her children are the only beneficiaries to her will. Which I feel like for the car dealer feller, he was probably like, all right. Now, mind you, she's not in the hospital at this point. So to say that shit is a little fucked up.
She needs to fall back on that there black candle and be like, I done predicted the future.
Yeah. Well, I thought that shit was some weird things to tell a complete stranger, but my guess would be she didn't expect that to come back up. And also at this point, stupid. If she did kill the other two people at this point, she thinks she's getting away with things because years have gone by in between and no one's been any of the wiser. Now, by the end of the summer, Anjette and Miss Julia would be seen in the restaurant together about 30 minutes before Miss Julia would fall ill. And Miss Julia starts vomiting up blood and becomes discolored. Anjette would send for the maid to bring Miss Julia back to her home, where she would remain until August 28th, 1957. And that's when she's taken to the hospital. At this point, Miss Julia couldn't even use her extremities. Now, between the time Miss Julia fell ill and the time she went to the hospital, Anjette would be seen with a bottle of taro ant poison, which Anjette would explain to Miss Cleo, an employee of the restaurant, that she used it for killing ants at her house. Which, I don't know why you'd carry it around with you then.
It's a restaurant. She makes sure she don't got ants.
She's like, anytime I see some ants, I got this here poison at the ready. Now, Anjette would be constantly looking after Miss Julia and bringing her food and drinks. One witness would say that she saw Anjette take a full glass of buttermilk, take a half full glass of buttermilk to the restroom at the restaurant with her, together with her pocketbook. I did the same thing. I was like, I don't care what she's doing in there, but why is the buttermilk with her? Now, when she came out, she would state that she's headed to the hospital. But I did have my notes in there. Not sure where your brain is at thus far, but even if she didn't kill anyone, that's fucking disgusting to bring someone's food and drink with you to a toilet and then head on your merry way to the hospital. Yeah.
That's weird. It's super weird. Where'd the buttermilk go? She just took it with her?
Yeah. She went to the bathroom, and then headed out and was like, all right, I'm going to head out to the hospital now. And then everybody in the restaurant are probably looking around going, did she just take the buttermilk to the toilet with her? Like, no, you know wonder, what, Miss Julia.
No. You know what? Jason drinks his coffee in the morning on the toilet, so...
No. That's different if you take your own shit with you. She was taking Miss Julia her buttermilk and takes it to the toilet with her. I don't bring Dave's coffee in the bathroom with me and then bring it on out and go, here's your coffee. I feel like he'd look at it, look at me, look back at it, look at me and be like, I don't want anything out of that cup. And he wouldn't even suspect poison unless it's food poisoning.
They would suspect turding, but I have a question. If she kept the ant stuff in her purse, why did she have to go in the bathroom to mix it with the buttermilk? Why wouldn't she have just done that in her car on the way to the hospital? She could have done it in a parking lot. Less obvious than taking a cup in the bathroom with your purse.
I can't help this one. Like I said, you gotta leave room for it. Maybe she didn't do any of this and people are just like, she's a weird lady who whispers to candles and takes buttermilk to the toilet with her. She could be a very filthy lady with some mental illness. You don't know. I'm just telling you a story.
Her idol could be Typhoid Mary.
2 to 3 days later, she was seen again with some more milk and disappearing into that there toilet again with something in a small paper sack that she had pulled from her overnight bag. Now she...
Why does she have an overnight bag?
That overnight... I'm telling you, she had that overnight bag because she would stay overnight at the hospital with Miss Julia. A nurse would testify that she saw Anjette bring Miss Julia food and drinks on several occasions, and that Miss Julia never drank the coffee because she didn't care for the taste of it. That same nurse would testify that several times Anjette would ask Miss Julia if Miss Julia was going to die, and that she only appeared to be grief-stricken when other people came to visit her.
Okay, so I feel like if you have your emotions in check to be supportive of the person that's in the hospital, for me personally, if, like, when Dad passed away,
it's harder.
When I saw you sad, it made me sad. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I could keep myself in check until I saw somebody else breaking down, and then it's like, well, shit. So that one's a reach for me too.
I know. That's why I said I'm leaving room to try to be the jury on this one of, is she guilty or innocent? Because I also was doing the whole, it's also if she's sitting there maybe watching TV or doing a magazine, and it's easier to disconnect from why you're in the hospital. You can't sob all the time.
Yeah.
But so that, like, and then when somebody walks in, it kind of brings you reeling right back into the scenario you're in, and they're going to ask questions of how she's doing. Well, not so great. So then if you have to talk about it, you can become emotional. So I too did the whole,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you're also, when you're explaining to the person that's now there visiting, like, and they're going through their range of emotions, it brings you all right back around. It's just like, it's a mess. So, I'm not convinced yet.
Yeah. Now, several other witnesses would come forward to say that Anjette would say how Miss Julia was dying when she would leave to take her food and drink from the restaurant. Just on her way out, she'd have the plate and food. I'm going to go visit Miss Julie or Miss Julia because she's dying. And then just keep walking, and it was just, she did that on several occasions. So they thought that was just odd behavior. But again, if she's whispering to candles and carries around her ant poison, the lady seems a little cracked to me anyhow.
I don't agree yet.
Now, Anjette would even... I know, that's why I'm telling you the story. We'll see which way you decide too. Anjette would even go so far to mention to Nurse Jenny that she couldn't stand Miss Julia, that Miss Julia had even moved into their home without an invitation, and she wished she was dead.
Is this the same nurse?
Right, this Nurse Jenny that tended to Joe, like when she would bump into her. Apparently she would just mutter these. Now, I'm going to tell you that I feel like I realize at this point Anjette just, again, with her, she just talks to just anybody evidently and says what's on her mind. But I also feel like if Nurse Jenny was having the hots for Joe, she don't like Anjette. So yeah. I don't necessarily believe everything.
You know what? I think this lady, I don't trust her. I don't trust the nurse. Yeah. And I don't trust any of the supposed witnesses that say that they saw this, that, or the other, because guess what? If I was going to leave to go to the hospital, first of all, this story is making me never want to bring anybody in the hospital some food, because if you're trying to be cheery about it and it's like, and you're giving an update, what do they expect from her? Is she supposed to be like crumpled up in a corner crying and saying, I'm gonna, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not convinced yet. Keep going. I think the nurse is a shady bitch, and the only person that's got me going, is the car dealer guy, which, if he's not so good with the calendaring, he could have his dates messed up. So he's the only one that's got me going,
Now, an attorney testified that Anjette told him that Miss Julia didn't have a will, but thought she should make one, considering her current state. 1 week after Miss Julia was admitted to the hospital, Anjette would tell another witness that Miss Julia didn't have a will and would be leaving nothing to her without one. That she had known an attorney that would make one up for her real fast, just the way Miss Julia wanted it. Now, 2 weeks after Miss Julia would die, spoiler, she does die, Anjette would bring forward a will dated August 20th, 1957, which made Anjette and her 2 daughters the beneficiaries. Mind you, Miss Julia not only had other children, but also living siblings. So everybody thought that was a little weird.
But you've got her with her and the grandkids. If she has other siblings and other children, when she needed a place to stay, why did she move in with her ex-daughter-in-law? So if all these other people were so important and active in her life,
Well, so one of her sons was, I believe, in California, and he was preparing to go overseas because he was in the Marines. So it's just like not everybody was local, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you're cut from the will.
I'm biting my tongue here, but I can't no more. But I'm cut from the will and I'm fucking local.
Now, this isn't about you. A total of 7 witnesses would come forward to testify that on the day Miss Julia supposedly signed this will, she was paralyzed and couldn't have picked up a pen to even sign it. She couldn't even press the buzzer to have the nurse call or even hold a straw. There was that. Now, on September 2nd, Anjette would present a notarized document authorizing her to claim Miss Julia's body upon her death. This was supposedly notarized with Miss Julia's signature. Anjette would eventually claim her body for burial. Now, mind you, on September 2nd, she's not dead yet.
Oh.
A document examiner would later identify that both the will and the burial documents were forgeries. Now, Miss Julia wouldn't pass away until September 29th, 27 days after Anjette wanted to claim her remains. Poor lady suffered a month.
I thought she was in the hospital.
Suffering?
How can she fill out fake paperwork to claim the body if she's still actively being cared for in the hospital?
Exactly. Can you imagine how confused the hospital staff were? She's presenting a document to claim remains that aren't remains yet.
Or is it that she was using the fake documents to try to claim the life insurance early?
I don't know. She was just preparing for her demise, and I guess she thought that she'd die sooner than she did, but that was a good chunk. Now, after Miss Julia's death, Anjette would inherit $11,197.32 as funds from the estate, in addition to $2,500 in bonds that Miss Julia had in her purse in the hospital. Which I thought was weird she carried them around, but whatever.
Apparently, these ladies need to have their purses checked back then. One's got ant poison, the other one's walking around with bonds.
These are big purses. It wasn't long after Miss Julia's death before Anjette began abusing her oldest daughter, Marcia. She would, on several occasions where there were witnesses, yell at Marcia, "You little Lyles-looking son of a bitch! I'll kill you if it's the last thing I ever do!" She not only was heard saying this on separate occasions
by the nurse.
She not only was heard saying this on separate occasions to the little girl, but people also would say little Carla would be crying and praying for her. No, apparently she would do this shit in the restaurant, Andrea.
It's sad.
Now, on one occasion, witnessed by Miss Cleo, on March 2nd, 1958, just after 6 p.m. at the restaurant, Marcia came in complaining that she didn't feel good and had a headache. She went to the back of the restaurant and draped her head over for a bit. Anjette was in the kitchen with some friends. Marcia would go to her and beg for her to take her home since she didn't feel good. Witnesses would state she did look very sick and was coughing and looked to have a high temperature. Anjette got a spoonful of sugar, poured whiskey on it, and gave it to her. 2 hours later, Marcia was vomiting.
I bet.
Didn't like her doctoring. Now, by 8 p.m., just 2 hours later, Marcia was vomiting, so Anjette took her home. March 5th, just 3 days later, Marcia was admitted to the hospital. Now, with this being a small hospital, Marcia was actually placed in the same room that Joe and Miss Lyles, Miss Julia, had been in while they were treated. Now, apparently, while Marcia was in the hospital, Anjette would tell 3 separate people that Marcia was dying. Maybe it was all that candle whispering.
But you know what? Okay, just for shits and giggles here, let's pretend like she's not poisoning anybody. I feel like every time somebody's gone in the hospital for this lady, they end up dead.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like it would be
Right.
that far-fetched to be like, okay, she's going in the hospital. She's going to die too. Great.
Right. Now, a few days after she first became ill, Anjette would get some grape juice, pour half into another glass, and disappear into the bathroom with it, with her pocketbook. She came out stirring the liquid, smelled it, touched it to her own lips, and then headed off to the hospital. Which now I was like, she just stuck her fingers in there? She better have washed her hands. I don't even know why she touched it to her lips.
Own mouth.
Weird. Right. Which, I don't even know why you would do that at all. I'm going to do that tomorrow. Make Dave's coffee, and when I hand it to him, just stick a finger in it and then just dab my mouth.
I feel like your finger is going to get burned.
Yeah, probably so. And then I'm going to flick it and accidentally splatter him with coffee.
No, anyway, next time he asks you to make him a drink, like pour some tequila or whatever, make him a drink, stir it with your finger, touch it to your lips, and then do some, and then hand it over to him. See what he does. But make sure you come out of the bathroom with
He's going to do, like I said, he's going to do like I told you before. He's going to look at it, look at me, look at it, look at me, and just like, so that one's yours, right? Now, roughly 2 weeks after the grape juice thing, Anjette would ask her maid to transfer the contents of one of her bags to the other one. Apparently, she was switching from brown to black or black to brown, one or the other. While doing so, the maid would notice that there was a bottle of ant poison in it. Anjette would explain that there were ants at the restaurant, and that's what she used to eradicate the problem. Now, the state would locate a pest control contract that Anjette had on the restaurant that came out monthly to check the premises. There would never be any complaints of ants. Had there been, they would have come out and treated at no additional charge.
Okay, but didn't you say you guys had ants in your kitchen the one day? And you guys were paying for pest control. Wasn't it just easier to treat the ants yourself?
That's where my brain hole went with this one too, because when we had ants come in and we told them, it took them 2 days to come out. And when the guy came out, naturally there's no ants, because guess what, feller? We took care of that shit the second we saw the little son bitches. And then the ant guy, or the pest control guy, well, the pest control guy had the nerve to be like, you shouldn't have done that because we could have tracked where they were coming in at and treated it. Next time, don't do anything. And I just fucking slow blinked his ass. Like, yeah, next time I'll just let the ants come in for 2 days. That's stupid. So that's also where my head went. Yeah, so it's great if they can keep down the cockroaches and the rats and the mice and all the things. I'm okay with doing the spot treatment if it's an emergency. And I will register a complaint, so the next time maybe lay it on a little thicker. But that was their whole, yeah, well, why? You could have had the ants treated by this company. Well, she did it herself, so I also did the, ooh. But I don't carry around ant poison in my purse in case I have to spot treat somewhere.
So, but my thing is, you also don't run a restaurant. But if you end up with ants, either way, at your restaurant or at home, if you have the stuff with you at home, why go buy more if you could just bring it with you? And if it's a repetitive issue, I don't think it's that far-fetched to carry it back and forth.
With all that juice in her car, she probably has them in there too.
Probably so.
That's probably why she started taking it into the bathroom. She spilled a cup. Now, a nurse on duty would testify that about 2 weeks into Marcia's hospital stay, Anjette would come in with some lemon juice. Marcia became violently ill immediately after drinking it. Anjette would bring her tea the next day, but Marcia said she couldn't drink it because it tasted funny. A nurse would testify that Anjette would state that if you looked at Marcia's knees, you could tell she's going to die. Which I don't know what's with this lady and knees. I know, I've never heard of that. Made me want to investigate some knees, but she apparently told a nurse to look at her knees. Is that like palm reading?
I don't dabble in the black arts.
It's patella reading. Now, Anjette would try to call a man in California several times, but couldn't get through. On March 22nd, Anjette would order Marcia a special casket and even organize having the children's choir sing at the funeral, and would start emptying her room of the flowers and even gave a cousin her bathrobe. Mind you, Marcia's not dead.
But the doctors could have told her that she's about to die, so...
Yeah. Now at night, Marcia would beg to be taken home to her own bed, all the while vomiting, having nosebleeds, again with the generalized edema. Now her kidneys would slowly stop functioning. She would go in and out of bouts of delusions, complaining of beasts coming to get her, insects attacking her, worms coming from her fingers. She would grab anyone near her and beg to be protected. I thought it was super sad because this poor little girl. Now, Anjette would apparently laugh when she would do this, like it was a joke.
You could be a bad mom, but doesn't make you a killer.
This kid, well, she thought it was funny when she would be having her delusions. Now, Marcia would die on April 5th with no signs of grief from her dear old mom. Now, I feel like all these people judging by how this lady's reacting towards death, I feel like you could still be in a little bit of denial, regardless of if you're sitting next to a body or held her little hand as she died, that of being in like a little bit of a brain fog.
Yeah.
You don't have to break down and do your grieving in front of everybody. So
no.
Not
and the inappropriate laughter, I feel like if people had to judge me off of that, then I'd be in jail right now. Yeah. Fuck, we have a podcast where we make jokes quite regularly about things that other people might find slightly inappropriate.
That may or may not be used against you in a court of law.
I didn't do it.
After Marcia dies, the nurse would call Anjette regarding paying her account. Anjette would tell the nurse that Marcia drank ant poison while playing doctor, and that the maid had found the bottle that she had drank out of, and that the little 7-year-old Carla said she was going to drink some so she could go to heaven too.
What?
The maid found 4 bottles of ant poison in Marcia's bedroom.
Again, that's not that bad.
Yeah, the coroner would proceed with an autopsy, but initially find no indications of foul play. Now, it wasn't until after Marcia's death, an employee of the restaurant would write a letter to an aunt of Marcia's about some of Anjanette's suspicious activities. You know, all the cups going to the bathroom and the candle whispering. The letter would make its way to the coroner, who then contacted Dr. Campbell, the Bibb County medical examiner. Now, the day after Marcia's death, he would collect her hair, tissue from her kidneys and liver, and then submit them for analysis. A few days later, Anjette would appear at Dr. Campbell's office to discuss Marcia's death after finding out there was a letter accusing her of poisoning her daughter. She would make several unsolicited visits. During her visits, she would have no reactions when the doctor would say he suspected poisoning and that some believed Anjette did it.
Wasn't it her that said that her daughter told her that she drank the poison? So she connected the freaking dots for them. So if she went to them and said, I was told...
You're getting ahead of it.
If she went to them and said, my other daughter said that my now deceased daughter drank ant poison playing doctor, what do they expect to find if they test the samples? Obviously she was poisoned, but if it was self-inflicted versus her, and my other question that is sitting here gnawing at my brain hole is the 4 bottles of ant poison, if they're full, who cares? It means she's not opened them or used them. Now, if it's 4 empty bottles, either she's got a serious ant problem or she's done been poisoning people.
The following day, Anjette would call and tell the doctor the younger daughter, 7-year-old Carla, had a story to tell him. Anjette would then have her explain that she had bought, Anjette would then explain that she had bought 2 bottles of ant poison and they were in a paper sack. And then little Carla would explain that Marcia and Carla were playing doctor with the Jones twins. They were using those bottles to play with. Now, Dr. Campbell insisted that Anjette contact the mother's twins and inform her at once. So Anjette whips out her phone book and dials a phone number. She then told someone on the phone how she feared for the twins and they may have gotten poisoned before hanging up, which I was like, I feel like that'd be a longer phone call than that. But
Right?
the twins' mom would state not only had she never gotten a call from Anjette, but her phone number is not in the phone book. The phone
Nobody
log would
said
later
Anjette
show
could
that
read.
The phone log would show that Anjette called her own home and spoke to her maid.
What?
Right. I'm sure when her maid answered, she was like, all right. And then she just hung up on her. Now, when the tissue samples come back, they find high levels of arsenic, high enough to have caused Marcia's death. She had received multiple doses over a span of several days. The doctor also examined the hospital records documenting her symptoms and was able to determine most likely the days she received the poison. Now, with it coming back arsenic and also shedding suspicion on the fact that there have been other deaths, similar symptoms, it causes the bodies of Ben, Joe, and Miss Julia to be exhumed. Dr. Campbell then removed the liver, kidneys, fingernails, stomach, and hair from each body for analysis. It was then determined that each had died from arsenic poisoning, multiple doses. Now, arsenic poisoning is virtually incapable of being detected by an average doctor unless it's suspected initially. Now, this is because it's slow and highly adaptive in small doses. So, I didn't know this one, but the body stores arsenic because it takes it so long to process and excrete. So, if you do several small doses, it builds up in the body and then it's a fatal dose, which is apparently how you kill people with it. And why they end up slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker because their body can't get rid of it as fast as they're absorbing it. Now, if someone were to get one large dose, it would make them really, really sick. They'd vomit. The dose would be lost. They'd probably survive. But arsenic is also called the great imitator because the symptoms can appear to be a plethora of other issues that you could get. So that's why, since people don't typically do the arsenic poisonings, that doctors aren't initially thinking it's got to be poison.
Interesting.
Now, the reason why they do the fingernails and the hair is since as those grow, it's kind of like with drug testing, that it'll leave those little marks on the hair, so then you can tell if they've received multiple doses. Now, also interesting, arsenic is virtually indestructible, and it can be detected in the body over many, many years later. Now, it also stops...
What if you shave your head?
You still have fingernails, so go ahead and pluck those out.
Yeah, but your nails grow so fast. I don't know.
Rip off one of your fingernails, it'll take you a few weeks for that sucker to grow all the way back out.
Right, but years? I'd say over the course of several years.
No. Hold your horses, not when you're living. When you're keeled over, dead, buried, it just stays in that state. So that's why even several years later, when they exhume the bodies, they can still detect arsenic because it's just like, it's still just as potent as it was then. And it stops breaking down the body once it's dead, so it's not like it's still turning it juicy.
Being processed, yeah.
So, surprise! Ben, Joe, and Miss Julia's tissue samples come back that they all died from arsenic poisoning. And again, several doses. Anjette would call Dr. Campbell another time and state she had a letter that would clear her name. The letter was written by Miss Julia and was addressed to Anjette. The letter would admit to being the cause of Ben's death, as well as her own, and beg for forgiveness. She would tell people that her maid found the letter in the lining of one of Miss Julia's pocketbooks. Her maid, by the way, would testify that that was the story Anjette told her would be the story. Like, you'd think if you were going to do that, you'd at least plant the thing so somebody did actually find it.
You would think.
Now, so Anjette would tell other people of this letter to spread the town gossip of her innocence. Now, it would later be examined and determined to be a forgery. I'm sure you're surprised at that.
Shocked.
Now, Anjette would be arrested and charged with 4 counts of murder a month after Marcia's death while she was being hospitalized for phlebitis. Now, I'm not going to lie, Andrea, I had to look that shit up, and then it popped up in another article that she was being hospitalized for varicose veins. And at first I was like, you can be hospitalized for that? Because I got some of them puppies, and I haven't been hospitalized for it. But evidently, they can get so bad, they swell and cause a lot of pain and can also cause blood clots in your extremities and does warrant being hospitalized for, which I was like, oh, not cool.
Yikes.
But that's what she was in the hospital for. Now, a guard at the hospital said that Anjette would make the statement while being read that she's being arrested, that all the brass hats in Macon were behind her, and it would easily get straightened out. She would remain under guard at the hospital until she was released and be able to be taken to jail. Now, after she's put under guard, the sheriff would have a doctor go assess her condition to see if they can just move her own ass over to the jail. Now, Anjette's attorney would make the statement that Anjette had committed no crimes and they had no other statements to make. The funeral director would testify that when he embalmed Joe, Miss Julia, and Marcia, he did not use anything that contained arsenic. Which I did chuckle at first when I read that, because I can see where they're trying to do the whole, oh, somebody else did that. But arsenic actually was used in the embalming process, but was made illegal to be used after 1950. So I was like, okay. So there was legitimacy there.
Yeah.
But Anjette would stick to her story that she didn't poison anyone and denied taking any drinks into the bathroom. Now, she would claim Ben was a heavy drinker and drank whiskey until he died, and that's what killed him. Now, Joe, she was like, he had a rash right after they got married. That isn't her fault. And Marcia, she played an ant poisoning, not to mention her funeral cost was more than she got from her life insurance anyway. And I was like, who says that shit?
Somebody that does not have a filter.
But that, and then you'll think Miss Julia said she was responsible for her own death. Kind of her to write that letter with the hand she couldn't hold anything with. But, surprise, surprise, the jury would deliberate. You want to guess?
Guilty.
She sure was. They found her guilty, and she was sentenced to die in the electric chair. Now, she would be the first white woman on death row in Georgia, and she would be the first woman to die in the electric chair, if she went to the electric chair. Now, August 1959, 60 days before that scheduled date with the electric chair, her attorney would battle for evidence to be heard again because the case was broadcasted on the news so much, she couldn't have gotten a fair trial just because everybody had heard of it. The evidence was only circumstantial, and he believed his client was nuttier than a fruitcake.
Nuttier than a fruitcake? Like, that's not nice.
So that was my verbiage. He said she was insane. I said she was nuttier than a fruitcake, because that's more southern. They start that hearing in September. By October, an insanity commission was appointed by the governor, who would consist of 3 doctors, right? Who would determine that Anjette was psychotic and a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, I'm kind of curious if you figure this is the end of the 50s, 60s era. I'm kind of curious if this was to work around them not wanting to electrocute a woman. You know, the old, if she's crazy, we don't get to be the first people to put to death. And considering the 50s, they didn't want to do it to a white lady.
Or the fact that she was talking to herself and whatever other
whispering to
symptoms
candles.
She may have been yeah. So maybe she was schizophrenic.
Yeah. Now, she was admitted to the Millage State Hospital where she would remain. Now, they did state that should she suddenly be deemed sane, she would have her death sentence restored. But I think that's real motivating to keep being the crazy you are. Now, while incarcerated at the hospital, they would allow her to work in the kitchen. Now, I about died laughing at this one because you put somebody in the hospital that has a history of poisoning people just enough to cause vomiting and diarrhea. Or, well, I guess just the vomiting and leaky rashes. But why would you do that? Now, she would live out her days in that nutty hospital and die in She would die in 1977 in the hospital. Now, ready for the fucked up part?
Sure.
They bury her next to her daughter and her first husband.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up.
I personally find it a little distasteful. She's the reason they're in the ground. Now,
what happened to the other daughter?
People raised by family.
Oh.
Now, many people would hold fast to the belief that Anjette was innocent, even despite the evidence. They would also go on to make plays about her, and that for local plays and shit in 2006 that would sell out, which I was like, all right, I guess it's interesting. We too made an episode about it, but that is the story of Anjette. Don't choose arson to kill people. It's very long, drawn out, and I agree that anybody who does that, they need to get the death penalty because that is such a long, excruciating death. I would literally choose all the other options before death by arson. Or not, well, definitely not by arson, but death by arsenic. I don't want to go out being burned either. Those two are neck and neck, actually. No, not really. Still, I'd death by fire because that's still, even though that's longer-ish, long, painful. It's not as long and drawn out and a month in the hospital these people averaged. All the while, she's still poisoning them. I'd rather be bludgeoned to death. Dave, take note.
Right?
I'm just kidding.
Don't, Dave. Do not take note.
I just thought it was real messed up that she's in this, like, next to her victims. There's literally no one else that I've heard of that's buried with their victims. I get their family, but who decided that? I don't think she should have been allowed entry. They should have burned her up. She's already hot wherever she is now anyway. I guess that's all I got. And you don't got any thoughts on the processings. I will say, initially, I was prepared to be like, I don't think she did it. But she should have quit trying to make everybody believe she was innocent with all her forgeries.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the earlier deaths, before they were all suspicious of Marcia, and she, frankly, if that one relative wouldn't have wrote about their concerns and of the poisoning, if they wouldn't have wrote that, they, considering all the symptoms that everybody else and the suspicions and all that raised the light, that she nearly got away with it for a fourth time. And I think the fact that she mentioned to somebody that Carla said she wanted to drink some to go to heaven, I don't believe that at all. I think she was setting the way for bumping off her other daughter.
I was reading when they stopped using arsenic and stuff for day-to-day products, because I know back in the Victorian era, it was in everything. But it says in 1984, the EPA determined that pesticides containing arsenic were not safe. And 2 years later, so 1986, did they ban using that in most pesticides. So, I don't know. I don't feel like it's that uncommon. And it makes me wonder how many of did she really do it? Or is it possible that they were getting regular doses of a regular product that was in her household that was poisoning them? Does that make sense?
Well, after being in jail for a bit before, like as she's getting squirrely, getting near the electric chair date, she does admit to putting a little bit of ant poison in Ben's soda when he was drunk to make him sick. But she said she wasn't trying to kill him. And he lived several more years after that. And I was like, you're not looking good for you. And then somebody else was all like, yeah, we just think she was experimenting with it.
Well, you done left that out.
I just told you.
Well, shit. What if, okay, let's say like you said, with the medical examiner or the funeral director. So if they did ban using it in the funeral services and all that, what if he was scared he was going to get in trouble and was like, no, we stopped using that shit. But they really were, because then it frames her.
Hold up. They don't use it in funeral services. It's an embalming process.
You know what I meant, embalming process. You know what I meant. I didn't mean during like a funeral service, jackass. I meant
that's what you fucking said.
The services that a funeral home provides with the embalming process is the word I meant. Shut up.
Yeah, I also thought of that because they process the body as if he was like, we still had some left. And then wouldn't it also be in the body? However, it wouldn't be in their hair and fingernails because that shit wouldn't have been growing. Because turns out you're not embalmed when you're still alive.
Well, I still stand by that it's possible there was stuff in the house because it was in the wood in the homes. It was in the baby care. Like, if you sit here and read about it, it was in day-to-day products. So assuming they weren't filthy, stinking rich, I would say that there's a very real chance that some of the stuff that was in their day-to-day usage could have had arsenic in it and led to the poisonings. Shit, in the 1920s, that was in the face creams for the women. They thought it made them look prettier. Turned out that swelling was
for their funeral.
Oh, gosh.
That's probably why she dabbed the grape juice. That was the cheap lip gloss. You don't need collagen. You just need a dab of arsenic on your lips for a little bit of swelling. It might turn into a seeping rash later on 80% of your body, but that's just life. We'll call it the ointment of hydration.
But seriously, where my brain went with things is if he just had wrist surgery, okay, and he goes home and then gets a weeping rash, is it possible that a beauty product that she provided her husband to help reduce like the scarring or anything, if it contained any sort of arsenic in it because it was in so many products back in the day, like that would have led to poison? Does that make sense? I don't know. There's still a chance. She could be autistic, so she has no filter and she seems a bit off. And then they could have been in products in the household. And then she just tried to lie her way through it because she's like, yeah, I get where this looks suspicious and I need to try to find a way to make it look less suspicious, which just made it look more suspicious. Should have just left it alone. She just
whispered into her candle and communicated. She whispered into her candle and communicated with the dead and then just wrote her a letter from Mrs. Lyles. She done did it all.
But the thing is, it's also a red flag, in my opinion, of she might not have done it, is that she said that, or she's the one that brought attention to the 9-year-old drinking the ant poison. Otherwise, she got away with it all. If it weren't for her going to them and being like, look, this is what I was told happened. I don't know if there's anything you can say or do about it, but this is what I was told. So if she didn't do that, it's not like they were questioning her at that point. She's the one that brought the red flag up of this is what I was told possibly could have been the cause. Is that possible? That's what happened. So no, I stand by it. Turned out she didn't know that she had to wipe down the countertops before she made food for her family after she put that ant poison down. I totally
did that with Mom. But I remember she got real sick because she made a sandwich on the counter, but I had sprayed Raid. I wasn't trying to kill her. Not at all. Absorbed into the bread, and she ate all of that. And then when she was vomiting later, it's just like, there was Raid on that counter. Wasn't the bread moist?
And this is why I clean my counters before I prepare any food.
This is why I don't put anything on the bare counters. I have not sprayed. That was when I was like a child. I didn't know. When first off, the Raid shouldn't have been out for me to use anyway. This story could have gone horribly different. It could have been Homicide Hobbies from the Grave. I wonder if Mom remembers that.
You should ask her.
I just remember her calling poison control in between the toilet vomiting.
Well, there was one time that I thought, okay, so we have real bad mosquitoes here. And I grabbed what I thought was the bottle of Off, but it was a bottle of freaking Raid. And I head to toe covered myself in Raid.
But you didn't have mosquito bite that day. You just had a weeping rash.
I was so sick. I ended up so sick. Jason will remember it. The kids remember it because it was just like 2-3 years ago. Actually, that was right before I set my face on fire. Turns out my life is literally like a Final Destination series over here. No, so I had asked, I think it was Jason or one of my older boys, to go get me the can of Off, the spray stuff.
You know what though? They're 2 separate sized cans, Andrea.
No, they were almost the same size. Yeah. I'll have to find the bottle that I used, but they were nearly identical in size. And I just remember
I want to see.
I ended up so sick. I was puking, and then Jason's like, "Get in the shower," and I was like, "I can't." Because I couldn't even stand. I crawled into the side of the tub, and I had my clothes still on, and he's busy hosing me down with the shower head, and he's like, "I don't know what to do." And then, yeah, it was not good.
That'd be a good.
I forgot about that. I don't know how.
Turns out that being waterboarded blocked your memory.
Well, my 14-year-old, who was obviously younger at the time, actually just the other day made the comment of Jason was outside and he wanted a can of the bug spray. And he's like, the 14-year-old said, "Make sure it's not the stuff you're supposed to spray in the air." And then he looked at me and started laughing. He's like, "Hey, Mom, do you want a can of Raid? It's been a while." And I was just like, you know what? Turns out it done made me slow.
Well, our mom ate it.
It's not recommended.
For weight loss.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.